Hiya, te peonea kokoke, or hello, it's good to see everyone. My name is Logan Pappenfort, and I'm the curator of anthropology at Dixon Mounds, Illinois State Museum. Today I'm going to be presenting about the occupational history of the Peoria in the Illinois River Valley. So a little bit about me. I am a Peoria citizen and was formerly second chief of the Peoria Tribe of Indians of Oklahoma. So this is a topic that's going to hit very close to home for me. And I thank you all for joining me for it. So I've broken up our presentation today in some different key ways. First, I think it's going to be extremely useful for everyone to have a general understanding of Peoria history. And so we're going to go over the general history and structure of the Peoria tribe, as well as some of the sub-tribes that make up the Peoria. After that, we're going to talk about some of the occupational territory for the Illinois tribes throughout time historically and how that changed, and specifically in regards to the Illinois River Valley. From there, we'll go and address some of the things in the archaeological record which play into the occupational timeline as well, and how we can meld these types of information together to make a more cohesive picture. From there, we'll be touching on the place name of Emiquon, where we all are today, and talking about some linguistics that went into that, as well as how we can look back at that historical context to figure out some of the reasoning behind that name. And in conclusion, we will then look at where the Peoria are today and what they're up to in general and how removal has affected them. So first off, very broadly, the Peoria Tribe of Indians of Oklahoma is what is called a confederated tribe. And so a confederated tribe is made up of several sub-tribes that have gone together for various reasons. In the case of the Peoria, all these sub-tribes united into a single tribe in 1854. And the tribes that make up the Peoria proper is obviously the Peoria, the Kaskaskia, the Piankeshaw, and the Wea. Now, out of those tribes, the Kaskaskia and the Peoria are what you would consider the Illinois tribes, and the Piankeshaw and the Wea would be more Indiana, Ohio considered tribes. However, the Piankeshaw and the Wea also were in Illinois as well, just not to the same extent as the Peoria and the Kaskaskia. So when talking about the Peoria and the Kaskaskia, the Illinois proper tribes, these two tribes were some of the principal tribes of the Illinois Confederacy. And at the time of European contact, they had control over a large swath of land ranging from southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, down along the bank of the Mississippi, along the Illinois River Valley, and even down into the American bottom near St. Louis. So this range was tremendous and more than most tribes could hope to manage in of themselves. However, due to how the Illinois Confederacy was structured with multiple sub-tribes, you see a theme here, it is made much easier. So in the Illinois Confederacy, you had not only the Peoria and the Kaskaskia, but you had the Tamaroa, you had the Michigammea, you have the Cahokia. And so all these tribes together make the Illinois proper. And so we see this dominance happening up until roughly the 1700s, when various clashes with other groups cause a shuttering of this group of tribes to occur. And then, it's not quite a collapse, but it is essentially a folding in and a becoming smaller out of necessity. And this kept occurring up until around 1818, when the Peoria signed their treaty and were removed from Illinois. Then talking about the Wea and the Piankeshaw, who are the other half of the Confederated Peoria. These two groups were initially groups of the Miami Nation. And so when these groups got large enough, they actually did separate from the Miami Nation. But this happened even before the 1600s, before contact. And so when we're talking about the range of the Wea on the Piankeshaw, we're looking at more southern Indiana and broaching into southeast Illinois, and in some cases towards the Illinois River Valley, but not quite to the extent that the Peoria and the Kaskaskia were. The Wea in their part, once it got to be 1750s to the late 1700s, were participating in some of the wars along with the Shawnee. And so they participated in the Battle of Fallen Timbers. And after this battle, along with the removal of most tribes, they were removed to St. Genevieve on the other side of the Mississippi River, which is where the close proximity to the Peoria and the Kaskaskia really started. So once all four of the subtribes were on the west side of the Mississippi and living in close proximity, they started to build relationships with each other. And through these relationships, they had some cohesion. And that cohesion was made even more solidified once they were removed to Kansas. And so upon this removal to Kansas, their reservations were right next to each other. And so as a result of this, by the Treaty of May 30th, 1854, the United States recognized the cooperation of these tribes and formally unionized them under the Confederated Peoria. And that is what makes up the general structure of the Peoria even today. And almost every family down in Oklahoma can trace their lineage back to this time period in Kansas. However, that time in Kansas was fleeting. And only a little bit over a decade after the uniting in 1854, the Peoria tribe was removed to Miami, Oklahoma, where there was a portion of Quapaw and Seneca Reservation, which was purchased by the Peoria and was their reservation allotment. And that is still where the Peoria are today. So when you're talking about removal treaties from the state of Illinois, you have four major treaties you're dealing with the Peoria, and that is the Treaty of 1818 for the Peoria, the Treaty of 1805 for the Piankeshaw, and the Treaty of 1818 with the Wea as well. And oddly enough, the Kaskaskia were one of the first ones to be pushed out in 1803. So this kind of gives you a rough terminal end of the timeline in Illinois for these tribes. So now we can focus on the time that we were here and the effect we had on that landscape. So what we have here is we have various maps that kind of outline some of our occupational territory in the state of Illinois. And this map on the right is made by Dwayne Essery, and this is one of the later versions of this map. This one was July 2021, and it outlines the occupational history territory of the tribe as well as what is the treaty territory. Now you can see that the occupational history territory far extends what was the treaty territory. And what you see with these triangles are Peoria sites. And along these sites, those red triangles are the Peoria Tribe's archaeological collection, which is owned by the tribe today. And so when we're talking about occupation of the Illinois River Valley, the sites that we're paying the most attention to would be Pimatui, which would be a village where Dilliet stayed in the mid to late 1600s. And he stayed with the Peoria uh, for 7 years. And so he got to see a wide range of cultural practices and activities, and really just a fantastic discussion and account of what we were doing at that time period. However, we also see that, Illinois had several camps right here in Lewistown in the 1680s. And this was our land, this was our territory. And as we'll talk about later, this was a place which we had very specific names for. These backwater lakes were our perfect environment and one that we cherished. And this map on the left is a really good example of our territory and how that shrunk over time. You can see the green map, it's our wide range territory all the way up to Wisconsin and then down into Missouri. However, you also see that the yellow is a reduction of that size, and in red is the even further reduction up until we were removed in the 1800s. So what can we learn based on historical context? We've talked about some of the things that Dilliet talked about with his occupation of the Pimatui for 7 years. But what we haven't touched on is, Marquette's initial meeting with the Peoria and how he essentially traveled, stayed with, and then eventually was safeguarded as he made his way down to down the Illinois River and eventually the Mississippi. But what are the limits of this contextual facts in history? I would say the limits of these facts are that it's a frozen image in time, and we cannot truly know the full picture just based on these accounts. So how do we understand the full picture then? Well, we do have our ways and our oral traditions that we've passed down through the years. And some of those ways talk about the ways we utilize this landscape. And that includes bison hunts, that includes mussel shells, that includes hunting for wild game, including some of the magnificent birds that we see even to this day in this area. This landscape has always been extremely rich. And that is something that we even see today after the restorations that have happened with Emiquon. And this landscape has not only been occupied by the Peoria, but even going back 11,000 years to the Mississippians, which build the great mound structures that we see all across the state. It's been rich that entire time based on the fauna remains we find, as well as the firsthand accounts of the wildlife that we see even to this day. And how can we really talk about how populated of a landscape that has been and what drew the Peoria to this area? Well, let's talk about the Illinois River Survey. This was essentially a grassroots project conducted by Dixon Mounds in the 80s. And so this was a volunteer effort to survey a large swath of the Illinois River. And as you can see here, we have Dwayne Essery and Kelvin Sampson back in the 80s walking the riverbanks, looking for archaeological sites. And along this survey of 166 miles, there were 208 archaeological sites found. That gives you a heck of an idea about the occupational history of this landscape. This was never a flash in the pan. This was always a heavily populated landscape, which natural resources were utilized again and again. So when we're looking at the Illinois River Survey, we see this occupational territory or occupational period extend from 1500 BC to all the way up until the 1600s. And so 1600s, that is right there with the Illinois. And so what we see is that the Illinois were continuing a pattern that was set by their ancestors and their forefathers in this landscape. We do see a little bit of a uptick in the terminal late woodland at these sites. However, that could be also accounted for by potential political changes as it goes from the late woodland to Mississippian occupational periods. But either way, if there's one takeaway we can say here is that this landscape was occupied for at least 11,000 years. And we even see records of this occupation in some of the earliest archaeological sites. What we have here is a photograph of twin mounds, as well as documentation of twin mounds on this French map. And you can see Lac des Memorials. And so this is something that is evident. And so these types of mound structures are found all across Illinois, in particular by bodies of water, all the way down from Twin Mounds to Cahokia. So moving on from the occupational pattern, why was this place so heavily occupied? And I think that actually has a lot to do with the name of Emiquon. And so when you look at the name of Emiquon, it comes from Potawatomi and Miami Peoria words. And depending on the dialect, that word can either mean spoon or it can mean squash. Now, I think both of those have a decent fit to why this landscape was occupied. Because I believe spoon refers to the abundance of mussel shells, which were utilized as spoon by my people. And that's a trend that we still see today. However, when it comes to the idea of the word squash, that is also very relevant because that right there points to agriculture, which these lands were rich in on at least the Lewistown side of the river, not so much the Havana side with some of those more sandy sediments. So moving on to the Peoria in question, where are the Peoria today after their removal? How are they thriving, and what connections do they have to the landscape? Well, the Peoria today are absolutely thriving in Oklahoma, and they are making efforts to be more and more present in their ancestral homeland. And some of the things they're doing to make that happen are just being incredibly involved with the aquatic life. The Peoria are one of the only tribes in Oklahoma that have a hatchery and a mussel growth program. And so this is something that I think is vital for the cultural well-being. We are connected to this water, these backwater lakes. And that is one of the things that spawned the hatchery and continues to help it grow. Thank you for everyone's time, and I'll be happy to hear any questions anyone has. Mission away.